Okay, chapter 14. This is gonna just focus on autonomic nervous system, which is like your automatic nervous system, and it's gonna be parasympathetic and sympathetic. Okay, so the autonomic nervous system is innervates your smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands, and keeps you alive. It's all the important things that keep you alive that you don't have to think about. It's like your automatic systems. Oh, here it is right here. Okay, so it's part of your peripheral nervous system. Somatic is all the stuff we learned about before in the other chapters. And so autonomic is over here. It's the motor part. And it's separated into sympathetic and parasympathetic, which are like two different pathways that I can take. Both of them have effectors because it's motor. I'm sorry, this is comparing autonomic and somatic. So both have effectors, but they're both motor. They have efferent pathways and ganglia. They respond to neurotransmitters. So effectors in the somatic nervous system, it innervates skeletal muscles, but in the autonomic, it's cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands because those are your involuntary muscles. Somatic nervous system, the cell body is in the central nervous system, and then you have the axon that goes down to the in the spinal cord. And then in the autonomic nervous system, there's a 2-neuron chain. So you have a preganglionic neuron with the cell body in the central nervous system and a little bit of myelination. And then the postganglionic neuron is outside of the central nervous system. So it extends to the organ like the muscle or the gland. Somatic nervous system uses acetylcholine. And then the effect is always stimulatory. And then with autonomic nervous system, the preganglionic fiber uses acetylcholine. The postganglionic can use or release norepinephrine or acetylcholine, and it can also be inhibitory. That's another difference. It can be stimulatory or inhibitory. So here's some overlap of the two. Higher brain centers regulate both. Most spinal and cranial nerves contain both somatic and autonomic fibers. So like your active muscles, if you have active muscles that require more oxygen and glucose, the autonomic nervous system can increase your heart rate and open up your pathways, so they work together. Okay, so this is somatic. This is what the neuron looks like, acetylcholine. This is a great picture. It's always stimulatory. And then autonomic can be parasympathetic or sympathetic. So sympathetic involves acetylcholine and then norepinephrine, and it acts on smooth muscle or cardiac muscle, right, or glands. I think this is showing the pancreas or adrenal gland. It's adrenal gland making norepinephrine. And then parasympathetic just uses acetylcholine. And the effect can be stimulatory or inhibitory. Okay, so there's two different divisions of your autonomic nervous system. There's parasympathetic. That's when everything's normal. Like you're at rest, you're conserving energy, everything's calm. Sympathetic is when your body is active. So this is when you're scared, when you're happy, excited, running, something's going on. I think of it, the way I remember it, is a sympathetic division sympathizes with your body and helps it to do whatever activity you need to do. All your organs you will see are served by both of these, but they cause opposite effects. Like everything is opposite about what parasympathetic and sympathetic do. So they're just, they show up and act at different times depending on what you need. So parasympathetic is when everything is like copacetic, everything's great, you're not in a rush, you're not panicking, like everything's fine. A person relaxing, reading after a meal. This is when your parasympathetic pathway is being activated, you are digesting food, you are making feces, you are making urine, like everything's working right. Your pupils are constricted so they don't have to let in a lot of information, like everything's chill, okay? The sympathetic nervous system is called the fight or flight, fight or freeze is what they're calling it now. This is when you are exercising, excited, there's emergency, embarrassed, like something, and your body's responding. So you will have increased heart rate, dry mouth, cold, sweaty, dilated pupils. This is the opposite of the parasympathetic response. Your digestive system is going to shut down too, because your body's not concerned about digestion at that time. So it's going to shunt blood to your skeletal muscles. So your blood's going to be removed from your digestive system and all that. It's going to get to your skeletal muscles so you can flee if you need to. Your bronchioles are going to dilate so that you can get more air. And your liver is going to release glucose so that you can get more energy to your muscles. Okay, so 3 main differences. One is the site of origin. So parasympathetic fibers are different, like they're different fibers in your body. Parasympathetic is craniosacral, so it originate in your brain and your sacral spinal cord, and then sympathetic fibers are thoracolumbar, so in your thoracic and lumbar regions. 2 other differences. The lengths of fibers, the parasympathetic ones have long preganglionic and short postganglionic, and then sympathetic is backwards. They have short preganglionic and long postganglionic. And then the location, the ganglia for parasympathetic are near the organ, like near the effector organ, and then for sympathetic, they're near the spinal cord. So here is the difference. Can I have my laser? Okay. So the fibers originate from your brainstem, the cranial region, and your sacral. So, and then they branch off to these regions. The pre ones are long, the post ones are short. The little light purple is the post. And then for sympathetic, they originate from thoracic and lumbar. The pre ones are short and the post ones are long. And this is where they go to. Okay. So here's a comparison of those 2, parasympathetic and sympathetic. Okay, parasympathetic division is also called craniosacral because that's where the fibers come from, the brainstem and the sacral region. And we already saw most of this. We saw this picture already. Okay, so cell bodies are in the brainstem. The preganglionic fibers. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Run in oculomotor nerves 3. So remember your cranial nerves from chapter 13. They control the smooth eye or smooth muscle of the eye, like your pupils, that are not, like you're not consciously making your pupils get bigger and smaller. And the facial nerve 7, another cranial nerve, and the glossopharyngeal nerve 9 to stimulate your salivary glands. Vagus nerves 10, that's 90% of all preganglionic parasympathetic fibers. It serves your thoracic and abdominal regions. So things like slowing your heart rate because you're calm, you're like at rest. Serve lungs and bronchi, sends messages to your stomach, liver, gallbladder, pancreas, small intestine, and large. And then the sacral part is serving your down below region. So your pelvic organs and large intestine. They branch off the pelvic splanchnic nerves. And they also synapse with your pelvic floor, which you might have heard of. So work with your large intestine, urinary bladder, ureters, and reproductive glands. Okay, so here they are. These are your brainstem ones, and then these are your, and they all of these, right? And then these are the sacral ones. Sympathetic division is mostly coming off of your thoracic and lumbar spine. And this is more complex, and it's going to stimulate like, there's some things are only going to be stimulated by sympathetic, like sweat glands, erector pili muscles when you're scared and your hair stands up, and then smooth muscles and your blood vessels. So I don't think it's showing those per se, but yeah, there's parts that are stimulated only by sympathetic. Okay, we already saw some of that stuff. There's 23 paravertebral ganglia in the sympathetic trunk, so that's where they're located. And you can see where they're branching off. And you have one sympathetic trunk that runs along the spinal nerve cord. So this is parasympathetic. Okay, so there's, when you enter the sympathetic trunk ganglion, the short preganglionic fiber can either, there's three pathways that it can take. It can synapse with the trunk ganglia, it can synapse with collateral ganglia, or terminal ganglia. I don't think we had a slide on that. Oh no, that's parasympathetic. So the third pathway is parasympathetic. Okay, so sympathetic pathways with the trunk ganglia, they enter the ventral rami by the gray rami communicantes. So you have gray and white. The non-myelinated is gray, the myelinated is white. It's only like that type only contains sympathetic neurons. So this is the sympathetic trunk, this is the sympathetic trunk ganglion, and then you have the white ramus and the gray ramus. And so it goes from here, loops around, and then goes down. So that's one pathway. This is another pathway. So this is the synapse trunk ganglion at a higher or lower level, so it can move up to another vertebrae and then move down, and this is stimulating the erector pili and the smooth muscle. This is still trunk ganglion, so the fibers can emerge from T1 to T4. These innervate skin and blood vessels, dilator muscles of the iris, make your eyes dilate, inhibit nasal and salivary glands, so that's why your mouth goes dry when you're like panicking. Innervate smooth muscle of the upper eyelid. I didn't mention this part. Your eyes dilate, your iris dilates to let in more light. So when you're panicking, your iris is going to dilate to let in more information. And then you have preganglionic fibers from T1 to T6. They innervate the heart, the thyroid gland, and lungs and esophagus. And so here they are, T1 to L2. And this is the first chunk that we saw. And then this is the second chunk, I believe, that we saw. Okay. Okay, collateral ganglia, most fibers from T5 to L2 are in the collateral ganglia. And there's three different splanchnic nerves, the greater, lesser, and least, and then the lumbar and sacral, and I'm not going to say that word again. So they are going to travel from the spinal cord through the white matter ramus and then out to your smooth muscle. So that's another pathway they can take. And they interweave, but mostly in your abdomen, your visceral organs. So they travel through the thoracic, I'm going to try it again, splanchnic nerves. And then the postganglionic fibers are in your stomach, intestines, liver, spleen, and kidneys. You also have preganglionic fibers from T10 to L2. They're going to control your large intestine, urinary bladder, reproductive organs. So that's that picture down here that I can't see. Some are going to pass directly to the adrenal medulla without synapsing. So they don't synapse, it's just a direct shot. So synapsing means like it goes from one nerve to the other, the action potential jumps. This one is just one single nerve. It's a motor neuron that's going to that gland. Okay, visceral reflexes. So visceral means like your body organs. You have visceral sensory neurons that are sending information about what's happening inside your body, and it's a good thing. So it keeps track of what your organs are doing. And they can have a parasympathetic pathway or a sympathetic pathway. Visceral reflex arcs are a regular reflex arc, but it's similar to somatic reflex arc, but this is from your visceral organs. So you're going to have two consecutive neurons in the motor pathway, like an upper and lower motor neuron. The afferent neurons that are receiving the information are visceral sensory neurons, and then the effectors that are going to get the motor response are going to be smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, or glands. So it's the same pathway as the somatic reflex arc. It's just coming from your guts and then going back to your guts, to your smooth muscle, cardiac, or glands. So like reflexes that empty the rectum and bladder, those are reflexes that babies are born with. They're instinctive, but they are autonomic instead of somatic. Okay. So we have the sensory thing in the viscera. They should show like a bladder or something. Information goes to your spinal cord, and then it's going to go to a motor neuron and cause a response, and you'll empty your bladder. Okay, neurotransmitters. So in the autonomic nervous system, the two main neurotransmitters, we already saw this, are acetylcholine and norepinephrine. Acetylcholine we've met before. It's released by cholinergic fibers. And then norepinephrine is released by adrenergic fibers. So those are your two neurotransmitters that are working in your autonomic nervous system. And you can see that in the sympathetic nervous system, when your body is busy and you're excited or panicking, you're going to use norepinephrine, which kind of makes sense. Like if you've heard of what epinephrine is, norepinephrine is similar. And then when the body's at rest and everything's fine, you're just going to use regular old acetylcholine. There's two types of cholinergic receptors that ACH, acetylcholine, is able to bind to, and those are called nicotinic and muscarinic receptors. They're named after drugs that can also bind to them. So nicotine can bind to nicotinic receptors, and muscarine, which is mushroom poison, can bind to muscarinic receptors. So guess what? Both of these compounds affect your nervous system. So you have nicotinic receptors that bind acetylcholine and nicotine, and all postganglionic neurons, both sympathetic and parasympathetic, you find these receptors on them. They are found on hormone-producing cells of the adrenal medulla, sarcolemma, skeletal muscle. So they cause like the normal neuromuscular junction business that we saw, where acetylcholine is going to bind to the receptor on the muscle. Muscarinic receptors are found in all effector cells stimulated by postganglionic cholinergic fibers. When ACH binds to it, this is different from the nicotinic ones. It can either be inhibitory or excitatory. It depends on which organ it is. So if ACH binds to a muscarinic receptor in the cardiac muscle, it's going to slow heart rate. But if it binds to a muscarinic receptor in the intestinal smooth muscle, it's going to increase motility. So it depends on where what type of cell that receptor is on. There's two classes that respond to epinephrine or norepinephrine. There's the alpha receptors and beta receptors, and there's these little subclasses. So I would say that norepinephrine is a little bit more complicated than acetylcholine, and remember, this is only in your sympathetic nervous system. So norepinephrine binds to cardiac muscle, causes your heart rate to increase, causes your bronchial your tubes to relax, to let in more air. So here's a summary of the acetylcholine, cholinergic. That's like acetylcholine has cholinergic receptors, and then norepinephrine and epinephrine have adrenergic receptors. And this is what they do. So there are drugs, like nervous system drugs, act on these mechanisms. So you might have heard of some of these, like nicotine. Anyway, like sarin is, oh my gosh, what's the common name for it? It was used in war. It's like a chemical warfare agent. Albuterol, you might have heard of for asthma, right? Phenylephrine is in colds. So these all act in different ways on your nervous system, which is pretty cool. Okay, so parasympathetic and sympathetic interactions. Most visceral organs have both. We looked at some that only have sympathetic interaction, but most organs have both. You can have like both signals going to the same organ, and then your body has to figure out what to do. So both can be partially active, but one is going to predominate. Sometimes they have a cooperative effect. Very cool. It's cool stuff. Okay, so dynamic antagonism for precise control of visceral activity. So they both are like antagonizing each other, but also kind of working together. Sympathetic division increases heart rate and respiratory rates, inhibits digestion and elimination. So you generally aren't concerned with pooping and peeing when you're running away from someone who's trying to kill you. And then parasympathetic is when you're at rest, decreased heart rate, respiratory rates, digestion and discarding of wastes. So smooth muscle is almost primarily just sympathetic. Like we said, some are just sympathetic and some are both. So sympathetic tone is vasomotor tone. This is your blood vessels are partially constricted all the time. And then that allows you to like control or like deal with your blood pressure. So your sympathetic system can move blood around wherever is needed. Parasympathetic is when your heart and smooth muscle are working and you're digesting and your urinary tract is working. It usually, it activates glands too, but it does not activate your sweat glands and your adrenal glands. Okay. And your sympathetic can override the parasympathetic. There are drugs that block the parasympathetic responses too. Okay, they work together sometimes. Best example is control of external genitalia. So the parasympathetic causes vasodilation, your blood vessels getting bigger, and sympathetic causes ejaculation or contraction of the vagina. So they do work together sometimes very, very harmoniously, and sometimes they're working opposite each other. Okay, so sympathetic division has some unique functions we already talked about. So the adrenal medulla in your adrenal gland, your sweat glands, your recti pili muscles, kidneys, and blood vessels only get information from your sympathetic division. And then also thermoregulatory responses to heat. So like when your body temperature rises, you dilate your blood vessels and they move closer to the outside of your body. They move more superficial, so they let heat out and they're bigger. And then your sweat glands activate. And then when you're cold, your blood vessels shrink up and move down to retain heat. So that's all sympathetic. You release renin from your kidneys, and that helps increase your blood pressure. So that's a sympathetic response. And then metabolic effects. This is interesting. So you're going to increase your metabolic rate. You're going to get more glucose. Your liver is going to help you get more glucose. You're going to mobilize fat, but your digestion is going to slow down. So like you're not using your food, you're not running your food through your body as much. You are just trying to get more glucose. Okay, parasympathetic division is usually short-lived, highly localized. One of the reasons is acetylcholine, we learned about this, is destroyed by acetylcholinesterase, so it doesn't stick around very much. Sympathetic can be longer lasting. Norepinephrine doesn't break down as quickly or get eaten up as quickly as acetylcholine, so you're going to have longer effects from the sympathetic. That's why it's like harder to calm down after a panicked response. So this is so interesting. These are all the things that your parasympathetic effects are and your sympathetic. And I want you to go piece by piece and compare these and see how they're opposites. Very cool. And then these are parasympathetic and sympathetic, and you can go look at each one and how they're opposites. Okay, so some clinical issues: autonomic neuropathy. Your autonomic nerves can be damaged due to diabetes, can cause a lot of terrible symptoms. Your autonomic nervous system is under control of your central nervous system. So if you have issues with your central nervous system, it can cause problems too. Your brainstem and spinal cord directly affects your autonomic nervous system, directly affects your heart rate, your blood vessel diameter, gastrointestinal activity, your pupil and lens. So they're all affecting each other. Also controls defecation and micturition, which is urinating. But you also have conscious override. Your hypothalamus controls your autonomic nervous system also, directly or indirectly. So like heart activity, blood pressure, temperature of the body, water balance, endocrine activity, emotional response, fight or flight, all of that is directly in control of your autonomic nervous system, so your hypothalamus. There's cortical controls too. So there's a connection between the hypothalamus to the limbic lobe, and that affects your autonomic nervous system. You have biofeedback, so your body is keeping track of what's happening and giving you feedback of that. Okay, so hypothalamus is the boss, but it's also going to connect to the limbic system, which connects to the frontal lobe, and then your hypothalamus is going to tell your brainstem what to do, and that'll tell your spinal cord what to do. So all of it is controlled by the hypothalamus, essentially. That's the switchboard. Okay, disorders of the autonomic nervous system. One would be hypertension. That's when you have high blood pressure. So that could be because you have overactive sympathetic vasoconstrictor. So your blood vessels are too constricted due to stress. So your heart has to work harder. Your artery walls are being subjected to too much pressure. Raynaud's disease is where you have vasoconstriction of your fingers and toes, and you turn, like your fingers and toes turn blue. Treated with vasodilators to make your blood vessels get bigger. Autonomic dysreflexia is when you have activation of the autonomic neurons in people with injuries above T6. You can have high blood pressure, increased risk of stroke. That's Raynaud's disease. So you just have like low circulation in your fingers and toes because of vasoconstriction. And this is developmental aspects. So the autonomic nervous system is derived from the neural tube and from the neural crest, and then eventually differentiates into your autonomic nervous system. Declines with old age. So some of the symptoms in old age due to damage to your autonomic nervous system are constipation, dry eyes, frequent eye infections, orthostatic hypotension, where you stand up and your blood pressure drops, and those are all because of your autonomic nervous system. And we're done.